leaving the scene. In terms of like what his clothes might have looked like, remember he lived directly across the street from where it happened. So it'd be
right.
So again, it'd be very quick for him to get back home, to get rid of those clothes, to wash those clothes, to throw those clothes away.
And he wasn't seen or suspected, so no one would think to ever look for these clothes.
Yeah, his parents were out of town.
Right.
Also goes to show about his upbringing and his parents. They went out of town to go party in Reno. So it's an older sister who had graduated from high school, Steve, who's a freshman in high school, and then he had two siblings who were twins who were in junior high. And basically four teenagers get left at home for the week by the parents as they go out of town to go have a good time.
Yeah.
So again, it's not like the mom is like home, like making dinner if
Right.
he comes home. So all of those things led to a very quick time frame in which it was possible for him to not be seen.
Yeah, it's just so crazy. So what do you make of the molestation allegations from the younger sister?
Yeah, that's really intense. And when I first heard those allegations, I remembered thinking that, first of all, as a journalist, I really better be careful if I'm going to print this, because it doesn't. If Steve did molest his younger sister, that doesn't mean for sure that he did the murder. But certain
Right.
people are going to start to add things up about him and continue to look at him in a certain way. So we'll put it this way: the younger sister definitely said that Steve molested her. She told friends. She told her parents. The parents did not believe her. She later told the police when the police reinvestigated in 2011. She reiterated that to the police. So I can't sit here and tell you 100% that.
Oh, right, because she made the original allegations when they were still teenagers.
Right.
And then she started running away.
Yeah. So do I know if she did it? No, of course not. But I know
Right.
that she told people at the time, and then she told people again later. And as you just alluded to, she ran away multiple times. And so clearly there were some things that were happening that made her feel not safe. And when you start to kind of add things up about what Steve Carlson did after this murder, and you look at all the different times that he ended up in jail, all the different times that just all the different things that he did over the years that were just
Right.
not pleasant, then it points to a kid who at minimum really had some issues with drugs and alcohol and some other mental stuff that was going on, and at maximum was really messed up in the head that he would do something like that to his sister.
He's never been diagnosed with anything, right?
I'm not aware of anything. I don't know how much detailed psychology has taken place with him in prison over the years.
His brain has to be fried from all the drugs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And he did admit that in the jail interview that he did in 2011 before they arrested him. He admitted that he already had been starting to do drugs before the murder. And then in the years that followed, he certainly did a whole lot more drug.
Yeah, it's just so crazy because you look at his pictures from when he's a teenager and he looks like a beach boy.
Right? Yeah.
You just don't even expect this to be his behavior. And I just was thinking, like, why did he start doing drugs in the first place? But, he was just a weird guy, He was a weird guy who said weird things which made him have awkward interactions with his peers. So, I mean, any of those things could. And it was the 80s as well.
Yeah.
So.
I think that there's some psychologists who would probably enjoy trying to figure out exactly what happened. Again, he did not have the best upbringing. His parents weren't exactly the most dedicated mom and dad. He, like you said, he looked like this all-American beach boy, right? He had blonde hair and blue eyes and was clean cut and kind of had a charming smile when you look at some of his high school photos. But he was also a kid who, even I talked to hundreds of people and all of them said the same thing, that there was just always something wrong with this guy. His nickname was Creepy Carlson, and the number of stories that girls told me about things that he did, chasing, just walking inside their house, walking up to some girl who's taking a shower and just opens up like the shower curtain, things that he would do with the pool. He did a lot of things that made a lot of people really uncomfortable.
Right. And it's like, 35 years ago, it's not like teenagers they're just like, that's the weird guy. There's always a weird guy. Every high school, every grade, whatever. There's one kid who just doesn't know how to act around everybody. You know what I mean? So I'm sure they just wrote it off to that. But you have to put some stock in the fact that when it comes to the sexual abuse allegations and things like that, I mean, he did end up on the sex offender registry all by himself, nothing to do with his family life or anything like that. So that does tell you something,
Yeah. So that was a few years after the murder. He had moved from Pleasanton to Davis, California. Davis is about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours away from Pleasanton. It's near Sacramento, and he was living there. And there was an incident with a girl who was underage, and Steve always maintained that it was consensual and that he didn't know what her age was. And
right.
I didn't talk to the victim of that, but I talked to the victim's best friend who was there and basically witnessed the whole thing.
Yeah.
And she made it very clear that Steve knew what he was doing. He knew what her age was. So yeah, he's look. I don't know. It's just really interesting when you look back on what was a little bit more socially acceptable for boys in 1984. And I'm not saying that what he did with this underage girl was then or ever should be acceptable. But when it comes to trying to get with girls that are a little bit younger, that wasn't as taboo then. It should have been. I'm glad that it is now. But still, this girl was really young. And no 13,
there's no way you can mistake. What are you going to mistake a 13-year-old for a 16-year-old? I mean, it's no better, Yeah. If you just, I talked about this a little bit in my episode too, when I was addressing the allegations from the neighbor Jane Doe from across the street. And I was explaining how instead of something happening to him, she was kind of just left with a stained reputation. It's hard to explain the 80s to people who didn't live through it. It's just we weren't as evolved then,
Yeah, it really was. I mean, when I was researching the book and writing the book, I listened to a lot of 80s music, and I was trying to watch a lot of movies from the 80s just to try to kind of get in that mindset. And I don't know, maybe this is like a weird tangent that I'm about to go on, but I rewatched the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And
favorite, seen it a million times.
So funny, right? So hilarious. But you look back on some of those scenes and it does not age well, right? The girl who meets the stereo guy at the pizza parlor and they just go to a baseball field and they go to a dugout and that's their date, right? Like and he was way older than her. And that was used as just like this funny thing where she learned that
she was lucky. Yeah. She was lucky she got to date an older guy, And
it was like, oh, she learned this lesson about sex and this older guy like did this to her, but at least he sent her flowers or whatever. Like that was the pop culture where we kind of learn things. And it's I forget where we were going with this, but yeah, it's pretty uncomfortable and creepy when you kind of look back on what people did.
Well, that's what spawned the politically correct 90s, So what else did you watch? Did you happen to watch Dazed and Confused? Because even though that's from the 90s, but it's about the 70s or whatever. But just, Matthew McConaughey's character hanging out with high school girls. Yeah. He's clearly 27 years old or something.
Yeah, and he has this famous line that gets quoted all the time. The thing I like about high school girls is I keep getting older, but they stay the same age. And yeah, like it's a funny line, but you look back on it like that's really creepy.
It is creepy, especially once you get old enough and have teenage daughters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's horrifying. Yeah. That's when you're like, there's one good thing about quarantine. All the teenage daughters in this country are locked up. Let's keep it that way.
Right. Yeah.
But, so the UC Davis situation made me kind of think of those kinds of movies too, because it's totally something you would see in a movie, that a poor girl a very young girl, first of all, because she was like maybe 14, I'm thinking, which is junior high is just so young to be having any of these experiences, which I just think is so crazy. But those allegations of what he did to her repeatedly and then brought his friends over and all that kind of stuff. And it just wasn't even a big deal.
Yeah.
She was just kind of maybe tainted after that, you know?
Yeah. Of all the interviews that I've ever done in my life, interviewing, and I called her Jane Doe because I didn't want to use her name. And
Absolutely.
Jane was a friend of Tina's. And I mean, that's some of the most gut wrenching stories that I've ever heard in my life. There's nothing in journalism school. There's nothing that you ever hear that prepares you to hear what Jane told me. Not just about what Steve did to her, but what Steve allowed his friends to do to her, but also what her father was doing to her, and
Exactly.
how she wasn't even as much concerned about this classmate doing inappropriate things to her on a regular basis, because she was more concerned about the inappropriate things that her father was doing to her.
And her safety in her own home. And, you know, I'm sure that he probably saw some type of vulnerability in her and preyed on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know. Predators can sense those kinds of things sometimes when they're trying to see who they can manipulate, you know, and it's just such a travesty. But the good part of that story is that, you know, things with her family, was able to, maybe this helped her find the courage to get those situations taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the other things that struck me researching this book and interviewing people is just the collateral damage, the number of people
absolutely,
whose lives were forever changed by this, you know,
even just the boys who saw the body.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, the girls who threw the rocks.
Yes. Tina's family, Steve's family, Tina's friends, some of Tina's acquaintances, some of her neighbors. Yeah. The girls who bullied Tina, who had nothing to do with her murder, but made her life miserable while she was alive.
Right.
So many different people whose lives were totally changed as a result of what happened that day. And, you know, for some people, they've been able to find direction and meaning in their life and still be able to kind of process and move forward. And for other people, it has been a lifelong struggle to stay focused, to be able to kind of function in society because of what happened.
Right. It's just so shocking. And I felt for the bullies, you know, and I was talking about that in the episode too. You wouldn't even really have called it being bullied at the time. She just got picked on.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah.
She was just one of the kids who got picked on. It wasn't an epidemic. It's just what happens when you get a group of children together, you know, and you feel bad for her stepdad, even though it's hard to feel bad for him after the scandal that he caused throughout that family by marrying Shirley's brother's wife.
Yeah.
Did they have kids too?
I'm trying to remember right now.
It's really been confusing explaining that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, in case people know all the details. Yeah. So Tina had a biological father. Then her adopted father and her mom got divorced, and the adopted father ended up marrying what would have been his
brother-in-law's wife.
Yes,
technically.
Yes, brother-in-law's wife. Thank you. So that leads to some awkwardness at family functions.
So that leaves the two siblings, Shirley and her brother, divorced, and their siblings have their spouses have married each other.
Yeah.
It's just awkward.
Super awkward. And I'll tell you what, I'll give a lot of credit to Tina's aunt, her cousin, many members of the family, because, you know, these are some uncomfortable topics for the family. And they told me, and I remember talking to them before the book came out and letting them know that, look, there's some uncomfortable things about your family. There's, you know, that are in here. You know, there's some things that you may not want the whole world to know. And They were really encouraging to me at the beginning to pursue the book. There was a couple of times in which I wasn't sure if I'd be able to finish it. If I didn't know if I could finish it, they encouraged me to keep doing it. They told me that they understand that everything in the book is not going to be super positive about their family, but they still wanted me to go forward with it, and were very complimentary to me when the book came out. Almost the entire family came to my first book signing when we launched the book at a party.